So I appreciate you inviting me to be here. Thank you so much. And I'm going to speak a little bit about the history of the NAACP and bring it right on home. So last month, Iowa State Congressman Steve King wanted to know how the language of white supremacy had become unacceptable. He asked a New York Times reporter, white nationalist, white supremacist, how did that language become offensive? To answer the congressman's question, that language became offensive after a long struggle led on the most part by the NAACP. I'll give a brief history. On February 12, 1909, the nation's oldest and largest civil rights organization was formed, the NAACP. National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, has been a driving force in fighting race-based discrimination in the United States. When it was founded in 1909, racial injustice was blatant and legal. Segregation, employment discrimination, and the denial of voting rights were commonplace. Moreover, people of color across the country had to live with the fear of violence and lynching. The NAACP's mission has been to achieve a fully integrated society with equal rights for all. To achieve its mission, the NAACP has not only focused on using the legal system to challenge discrimination, but also in convincing all people of the need for racial equality through speeches, organizing, and legal advocacy. The NAACP's first challenge was fighting Jim Crow laws, which effectively maintained legal segregation. I'll give a brief history of Jim Crow. In 1890, Mississippi became the first state to manufacture laws to disenfranchise black voters, rather than rely solely on terror and fraud. Other states followed, and by the end of the century, the work of disenfranchisement was complete. In 1896, there were 130,334 African Americans registered to vote in Louisiana. In 1904, it was only 1,342. If you did the math, in 8 years, they disenfranchised 128,992 people in that state. In Virginia, the same year, the estimated black turnout at the presidential election was 0. In 1915, the year the notorious movie The Birth of a Nation was screened at the White House, the NAACP was instrumental in outlawing the Grandfather Clause, which allowed white people to get around literacy tests that were used to prevent people of color from voting in many states. From 1920 to 1938, the NAACP flew a flag outside its New York City offices with the words, "A man was lynched yesterday," to call attention to the rampant lynching occurring in the United States. In the decade from 1890 to 1899, between 78 and 161 black men were lynched every year. The establishment of Jim Crow was not simply a matter of laws suppressing African American voting and segregating schools and transportation, or of a pattern of social practices that became ingrained. Jim Crow was a regime, a system of authoritarian government that was created over and over again. In 1930, the city of Birmingham made it illegal for a black person and a white person to play dominoes or checkers together. In 1932, Atlanta prohibited amateur baseball clubs of different races from playing within 2 blocks of each other. In 1935, Oklahoma required the separation of races when fishing and boating. In 1937, Arkansas segregated its horse racing tracks. Jim Crow required a constant reminder of who was in charge. its mania for racial separatism was insatiable. 17 states had laws banning interracial marriage until 1967, when the Supreme Court declared them unconstitutional. That's 17 states. From the Compromise of 1877, which ended Reconstruction, to the Civil Rights Act of 1864 and the Voting Rights Act of 1865, American race relations were largely shaped by states that had seceded from the Union in 1861. And the elected leaders of those states, almost all, spoke the language of white supremacy. White supremacy was the motto of the Alabama Democratic Party until 1966.
Wow.
Mississippi did not ratify the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery, until 1995. How did this happen? How did white people in a part of the country that was virtually destroyed by civil war contrive to take political control of their states, install manifestly undemocratic regimes in them, maintain those regimes for nearly a century, and effectively block the nation from addressing racial inequality anywhere? Part of the answer is that those people had a lot of help. Institutions that were constitutionally empowered to intervene twisted themselves every which way to explain why, in this matter, intervention was not required. One such institution was the Supreme Court of the United States, with notorious decisions such as Dred Scott, 1857, and Plessy v. Ferguson, 1896. However, in 1954, the NAACP's chief counsel, Thurgood Marshall, successfully argued the case of Brown v. Board of Education before the Supreme Court, ending the legal segregation of schools. However, it would serve us to remember that segregation began in the North, where it was not the product of the practice of slavery, but of anti-blackness. In 1835, Alec de Tocqueville wrote, "The prejudice of race appears to be stronger in the states that have abolished slavery than in those where it still exists. And nowhere is it more intolerant as in those states where slavery has never been known." He's saying, in essence, that race prejudice was stronger in the North. After 1900, the South had Jim Crow, a legal regime of separatism, but the rest of the country had ghettos, redlining, gerrymandering, quota and exclusion systems, and the duplicity of the local school district. Legal segregation was more direct, and the fight was clearly in the courts. But de facto discrimination, what we now call institutional racism or colorblind racism, is just as harmful and much harder to fight. On Long Island, we live in one of the most segregated regions in the nation. It may not be legal segregation, but it is just as real and harmful. In Amityville, where I live, it is effectively two towns, one white and one colored. This racial segregation brings with it the accompanying problems of white supremacy, anti-blackness, and the denial of the harmful effects of racism. In this area, racism still exists. In the country, racism exists. This is why the NAACP is still relevant. Everyone who was socialized in this region or in this nation has been socialized to participate in racism. White people benefit from racism regardless of their intentions. The intentions of individual people are irrelevant. No one chooses to be socialized into racism, but in America it is inevitable. We are not bad, neither are we exempt from the power of racial socialization just because we have good intentions. Part of that socialization is anti-blackness. Black youth still use "you're black" as an insult, or claim that they are not black. White people also hold anti-black views, both consciously and unconsciously. We as a community of conscious people, black, white, and otherwise, must continually identify, analyze, and challenge racism. We must continue to disrupt the status quo, even if that makes people uncomfortable. Because that comfort is what has maintained the racial status quo for so long. For example, it makes white people uncomfortable for me to use the phrase white people. However, group identity and group history do not just belong to people of color. White people have a group identity and a group history also. Denying this contributes to the denial of racism's impact. Furthermore, we need white allies to do the work to raise white people's awareness about institutional and individual racism. That means educating yourself about racism and recognizing your limitations in doing anti-racist work. The patterns of white supremacy and institutional racism are right here. In this community, there is evidence of a preference for residential racial segregation and isolation. Most white people do not feel any loss about that segregation. We deal with white people who live in segregated communities. As a result, they have a deep lack of understanding about what racism is and a lack of racial humility. We encounter these people in our workplaces, in the criminal justice system, in the healthcare system. Our children encounter these people in the schools. And we, as parents, encounter these people when we deal with the school system. The racial segregation on Long Island has many negative consequences, and it makes the struggle for racial justice very real. Some of the results are that many whites tend to believe that white cultural norms, practices, and values are superior and better. They tend to internalize negative stereotypes or believe that whites are smarter or superior to people of color, and tend not to notice the daily indignities that people of color experience. I'll give you an example of some of the common patterns of white people, consciously and unconsciously, borrowed from Robin DiAngelo's groundbreaking book, White Fragility. So you can recognize them, and so we can produce white allies to help eliminate them. Many whites tend to consciously and unconsciously blame people of color for the barriers they experience, believe that people of color are only hired or promoted to fill quotas, interrupt or talk over people of color, resent taking direction from a person of color, dismiss and minimize the frustrations of people of color, and categorize the person raising the issue as militant, angry, having an attitude, or not being a team player. I know you are all too familiar with these patterns. We confront this in our daily lives. This is why we have to continue to fight to achieve racial equality. We want our children to inherit a world without racism. That is why the NAACP was formed 110 years ago. We must continue to fight, to call out racism when we see it. And we do this even though it is very difficult to talk about racism. But we need our white allies to take up the mantle, to identify racism as it is happening and make sure that anti-racism is a part of the discussion. When we call out inevitable, unconscious racism, there will be predictable responses. Many white people will say, I know people of color. I have black friends or a black spouse. I don't see color. I was raised to treat everyone equally. You don't know me. You are playing the race card. I just said one little innocent thing. You hurt my feelings, and many times white women will cry. These responses function to incapacitate our efforts to seek racial justice. They effectively maintain white solidarity, silence the discussion, protect a white supremacist worldview, protect racism, make white people the victims, rally more resources to white people, minimize, hijack the discussion, and protect white privilege. We cannot allow these tactics to derail us from achieving our goal, which is a fully integrated society with equal rights for all. As difficult as it is to fight the segregation we have here on Long Island, we must continue to work towards the NAACP's goals and achieve racial equality in America. This fight is not over until all of our children have teachers, doctors, dentists, business owners, and public servants who live in the same neighborhoods as them, and they see themselves represented in the fabric of this country at every level. It is important because we matter, our children matter, and our future in this nation matters.